This episode is sponsored by the Body Image Upgrade, a 30-day course helping you rebuild your relationship with your body. Tools, resources, and daily exercises to upgrade your body image. Learn more at bodyimageupgrade.com and enter the code podcast for 50% off. Welcome to Breaking Body Biases, a podcast about creating health and happiness without worrying about your weight. I'm Christine DeFilippis, certified fitness professional, studio owner, and creator of FitProEd, an online education platform for group fitness instructors. Join me every week as I interview fellow fitness pros, dietitians, wellness practitioners, and a wealth of others who are sharing their journey and helping to destroy diet culture. Welcome to episode 11 of the podcast. It's Christine here, your host, and I'm excited for you to be here and to be tuning in. It's been a wonderful journey hosting this podcast. I'm very excited to be able to speak to the people that I get to interview. So grateful for their time and their expertise and them opening up and sharing their life experiences. We all have different experiences. We come from different backgrounds, and those experiences really shape who we are. And the goal of this podcast is to shed light on things that we don't normally hear about and see. And this particular episode that I'm talking to Registered Dietitian Amy Rapone today, we talk about disparities in healthcare and eating disorders and fat phobia. Amy is a registered dietitian out of Connecticut, and she has her own practice, RadLove Nutrition. I talked to her about how she got into the nutrition field because it wasn't her primary focus when she went to college, something that she decided to do later, and what it feels like being in the nutrition world in a larger size body. She shares a very personal story of how she was treated by healthcare professionals, and I hope that you open up and hear this episode. And again, the goal is always to influence and create change. So that way people don't have the experiences that some of the guests that I talk to have had. And we hope to create more happiness and joy and ultimately improved health in the world. And that includes improved mental health and improved happiness, right? So today I talked to Amy about her experiences. We talk about eating disorders, talk about the difference between disordered eating and eating disorders. And I just think you'll really enjoy our conversation. I just really enjoyed talking to her. So let's get into the episode. Welcome to the podcast, Amy. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's very exciting to be here.
I'm always interested to learn how someone gets into being a dietitian. Was there something you were looking for when you decided to become a dietitian?
Sure. So I went to school as a business major first and hated it. So I left school for a while and then decided, gee, I really have never been happy with the size of my body, but I'm not going to tell people that's why I'm going to go into nutrition. But I bet if I learn nutrition and I do a whole college thing with it, that I can be skinny again, because I've lived in a fat body my entire life. And of course, had never been okay with it before. So I was already a married lady, so I was kind of a little outside of the normal college life by that time, but certainly spent most of my college years and the first few years out of college and becoming a dietitian, going through my dietetic internship, still wanting to change my body. I think as time went on, I definitely wanted to do that less, especially once I became a mom. I think that was the really big linchpin for me, that, I was, okay, we're in this now. Your body just did something freaking amazing. You grew a person and you birthed it, and there it is. And from there, I started to really get interested in what being in a larger size body and being powerful in that really is. And I found Christy Harrison's podcast, Food Psych, started listening to that religiously. Every week I was on top of that, and realized, working in the inpatient hospital setting that I was in, as well as doing some outpatient work with the hospital too, it really clicked for me that what I learned in school to help people was not working for them. And most of the time, I ended up referring people out to mental health care alongside doing the work that I do, because there were so many other deeper things going on that were out of my scope of practice. And so through Christy's podcast, I really started to learn more about health at every size. I really started to pick that up and was frustrated in my current position, and was very fortunate to be able to jump into working at an inpatient eating disorder unit, where health at every size is a little bit more accepted in the eating disorder field than in typical medical fields right now. So I was very fortunate to be able to do that, and loved my job so much until that unit unfortunately closed due to hospital issues that they no longer wanted they didn't feel like it was supporting our community enough, which is unfortunate. So when that happened during the pandemic, of course, I started my own private practice to do weight inclusive nutrition care and continue working with eating disorders. And now I'm psyched to be doing it all the time. And now I can do it my own way, which is really nice.
Yeah, and really help more people, because you mentioned that what was the common way of doing your work wasn't working. It wasn't working for people. And you worked, was it your internship or your, as well as a position that you were working with eating disorder care?
Eating disorder care, I was actually kind of scared of it for a really long time. There's such a stigma around being able to help people with eating disorders, and we don't learn much about it at all. Maybe we have a day that we learn about it. And in my master's courses, I did have a full course on it as well, because I signed up for it, not because of it being a requirement or anything like that. And I learned a little bit more, but still was still scary for whatever reason. And the more I thought about it, the more I felt like I had the skills to be able to do that work. And so it was scary, but I definitely made the jump, and I was so glad that I did, because it was really the big part for me that changed my career. Because I was second guessing even being a dietitian anymore, when I was kind of wondering if I was actually truly helping people or causing harm. I know I certainly wasn't helping myself anymore at that point. So I was having a lot of thoughts. So I was glad that I found an area of dietetics that I could actually thrive in.
Yeah. It's interesting and very sad that eating disorders aren't covered in nutrition school. To just hear that it's a day is startling, because so many people suffer from eating disorders and there is such a stigma. So it's very sad to hear that it's not something that's covered more.
It's incredibly sad, especially my years growing up and the recent age of fighting against childhood obesity was pushed so much onto us for so long, when really I feel like we've just made eating disorders far worse. And instead of focusing on eating disorder care at that time, which we could have really turned things around instead of focusing on that. So that's really where I struggle the most, even with my own children, because my first daughter is 5 now, and she's going into school next year, and it makes me super anxious to know what I'm going to have to combat as far as other kids and the things that they take in learning in school that are typical, nationally recognized things that aren't super helpful, that
Right.
can cause a lot of things. So many of my eating disorder patients that I've had have told me, yeah, being weighed in school was like one of the biggest things that threw me off, or having my weight read aloud, or comparing myself to others in sports, and not being covered enough.
Yeah, there has to be a change in all that, because it's doing so much harm. And thinking about all the harm starting at such a young age, like 5 or 6 years old, that
Absolutely.
kids are thinking about their weight. And it's not good for their self-esteem. It's not good for their mental health. It's not helping them in any way. So there's definitely some things that maybe we can help destroy Like you said, maybe not, maybe we shouldn't be weighing our kids in school. Reading aloud, I can't even imagine. Is that still being done now?
I sure hope not. And those are the things that I get so nervous about.
Right.
I sure hope not. And Lord knows I would write a real good letter, write a really good email, or be knocking on the principal's door if I hear that that happens.
Yeah, I
There
think
would be
that
some real change happening.
Yeah, I think we all should get on board with this change. The listeners listening right now, if this is going on in your schools, the harm that can be done is lifelong for people that I reflect on messaging that I received when I was young. And even you, when you mentioned that the anxiety you have as a parent for your daughter, because you know,
I know I lived through it. I
yeah,
lived through it. And I know she's my kid. Many women in our family are on the larger side. So I, that's likely going to be her body shape. And so I want to make space for that for her and make sure that she feels okay and feels strong and, you know, owns it, you know, and that's really where my base in working in fat positivity really works for me, because that's, we're still worthy people in a fat body.
absolutely. For sure. So let's talk about eating disorders again, because you do work in this area because there are disparities in the way people are treated, and for those in particular with marginalized bodies. So can you talk about that and share that insight with our listeners?
Absolutely. Working in inpatient care really opened my eyes to that, because it's not something I ever really thought about before. Working in a regular outpatient setting through the hospital, I didn't have a whole lot of eating disorder clients then, but insurance coverage in the US is uh, pretty sad when it
Yeah.
comes to covering nutrition services in general, especially if you are on a state insurance or a national insurance. There is not a whole lot of coverage, and some only cover like 3 sessions a year. There's not a whole lot of change happening in that time frame. When it comes to eating disorder care, insurance again, or lack of insurance for so many people, because so many are on disability, because if their eating disorder is very acute, they're just not able to work a job and function in society like that. And it's really difficult to do any kind of work when you're not nourished. So when they're fighting against this mental illness, they don't often have the finances to cover really expensive insurance care. And that's in any size body. Never mind when we are discussing the lack of screening when it comes to people who are in normal straight size or larger bodies, because they don't expect that they would have an eating disorder because they look quote unquote okay. Or we're just prescribing them weight loss based on their looks without even asking what they're already doing, which can further eating disorder issues. Or people in larger bodies just get labeled as having maybe a binge eating disorder, which isn't necessarily the case. There's so many people in larger bodies who have significant issues with anorexia, and it's just not recognized, and it furthers their own thoughts about how unworthy they are for food.
So you mentioned something about binge eating disorder. I know this is an area of your expertise, and possibly emotional eating.
Sure. So I think we get the two confused oftentimes. We consider, oh, I binged on a pint of Ben and Jerry's last night, or when we're just not feeling it. But there is a distinct difference. People binge for a lot of different reasons. Trauma can be one, it can be disparities, financial disparities, or food access can cause a lot of binge eating issues as well, which is why sometimes it happens in people who aren't getting the coverage for the insurance like we would like them to for that kind of treatment anyway, in addition to emotional things. Emotional eating is a little bit different, and sometimes we want to make sure of the why behind while we're eating. That's the biggest thing that I always ask when people are saying, oh, I binged. Like, okay, well, how much was it, and what were you feeling about yourself? Because it's really the afterthoughts of the guilt, the shame, the I shouldn't have done that, I'll restrict the rest of the day, that can continue to cause this cycle. And when it comes to using food as a coping skill, because that's essentially what we're doing with emotional eating when we're having a bad day or we feel like we want to comfort with food. That's okay. Food is a nice, safe way to cope sometimes. But when it becomes your only coping skill, that's when we might be looking at something closer to a binge eating disorder, where we're really just relying on food all the time as our only form of comfort and our only form of coping for whatever's going on.
Okay, so there's like a almost like a sliding scale here. You're
Kinda, yeah.
emotional and you're eating, but it could get really bad if it becomes like too much. So if you have clients that are emotionally eating, whether it be a bad day or because you work with people in this area, what can you tell to a client that is maybe taking those steps and it's just one day and then it turns into two, or you notice that it's becoming their coping mechanism, like you had mentioned? What are some strategies that will help them so that way they don't go into binge eating disorder?
Sure. And so there's a lot of different strategies. It's all very individualized, but my always number one first thing, and it's really for most of my clients, no matter where they're at, is to be following up with therapist or psychiatric care in some way. I'm a firm believer in therapy. I feel like I can only work within my own scope. And because when we are dealing with lack of coping skills or trauma or things like that, that's not something I can ever speak to. So I like to make sure that they have a safe therapist that they can speak to those things about and start to process those, build other coping skills so that we can start moving away from that. As far as the work that I do with them, we just kind of determine meal patterns throughout the day, making sure we're having some meals and some snacks. So, because a lot of things that can also promote binging at the end of the day is pushing off eating, pushing off eating, pushing off eating, and then your body wants food by the end of the day. You haven't done anything all day, or you haven't done enough all day. And so your body's like, all right, let's go. We got food to eat. I need to be able to function. So sometimes that cycle that can occur. So when we can bring it back and be like, okay, let's get those meal patterns set up. Let's make sure that each of those times is nourishing and adequate for you. You're being satisfied by those meals. And then, kind of one of the next pieces to the puzzle is focusing on our hunger and fullness cues. Those can be a little bit tricky for people if for whatever reason they're not connected to their body in some way, or if they've had a long history of restriction. Those hormones that tell us when we're hungry and full aren't working quite as well as they could if we were fully nourished. And so those kind of take a little bit of time. And I really try to stay away from the tracking of things like that, which when we're thinking about hunger and fullness cues, it's hard to not want to track with that, to know, okay, this is the okay time to eat. This is the not okay time to eat. Because sometimes it still is the okay time to eat, even if, you're not fully quote unquote hungry at this moment, or you're not starving. But knowing that there's a nuance there where it's a sliding scale of, you may not be starving, but you can be hungry. So it's okay to have something, and just kind of checking in a little bit more.
I like what you said about nuance because I think that there can be a lot of it's either this or this. It's so black and white, and there can be a lot of nuance, especially when you're dealing with, like you had mentioned, trauma or any kind of disordered eating that you're not really in tuned with your cues, like you had mentioned.
Yeah. And compassion and curiosity are my two C words that I like to use around this work for sure, because you have to have the compassion for yourself that it's maybe not going to be easy by any means, and it's not going to always feel like you want it to feel like. It might be hard. And so having compassion and patience for yourself, and then the curiosity of trying something new and increasing the variety of things that you're comfortable with. Those are really the big ones that I try to focus on.
I love that. Compassion and curiosity. Those will be our C words.
Yes.
So let's talk about fat phobia in healthcare, because we were talking a little bit about healthcare and it really being flawed here in the US. It might be flawed
Absolutely.
elsewhere in the world, but we can only speak about our experiences here in the US. So what share with us your thoughts on the current healthcare system and fat phobia?
Sure. I will be upfront and say that, of course, as someone in a fat body, I've experienced fat phobia in medical care. I remember when I first went back to school actually, it was right before I was working for an independent company who wanted to get me health insurance because I had just gone up to full time. And because I was the only one and because of my BMI at the time, I wasn't able to get insurance. They weren't going to cover me because that was before the Affordable Care Act made that possible. She was very kind about it at the time and I thought that she was the best idea is that she got me a gym membership instead of paying for my insurance. And while I'm sure she felt like she was doing the right thing, I think that definitely threw me into a loop of what my worth was. And then for years after the fact, still trying to get insurance and not being able to because of my BMI at different places. So I went a long time without medical care because I couldn't afford it. I was in school, I was working, low paying jobs. So I decided that was okay. And there were probably things, I was young. I didn't have a whole lot of health issues going on at the time, so I didn't really consider it as an issue. And then I got my job at the hospital. I was able to get full-time insurance. And then my husband also was able to carry our insurance for some time through a larger corporation. But I still didn't go to the doctor. And I think it all boiled down to every time I felt like I went, my weight got brought up. No matter how much I tried, no matter how much I didn't want to be this weight, because I knew what weight I was at. And I would try every diet in the book. I would do the workout routines. I would do everything. And nothing was helping me get there. And actually, it was pushing me into a higher weight because my metabolism kept changing. And I'm sure other factors as well. So finally, when I got my hospital job, I was able to find a doctor who was incredibly respectful of my, he knew me personally as well. And so he would kind of be like, yeah, I know you're a dietitian. I know you know what you're doing. And he let me feel trusted in that, which was really nice. Unfortunately, he left the practice, so I was unable to see him anymore. And I just recently, I've been hemming and hawing about finding a new doctor because I work with doctors every day. So I'm really picky about who I want to see. And I know too many now. And I went to one who was in the same office because I had an ear infection and I knew I had an ear infection, but I wasn't going to be able to get antibiotics unless I did something about it. So I went and I saw her and she's like, yeah, you really should book a physical. I was like, okay, I'll book my physical and I knew what the conversation was going to be when I booked the physical, because she's like, I'm not really going to bring it up right now because you're here for an ear infection, but I want to bring it up. So you should really book your physical. And so I went to the physical and I'm at a point at this where I'm so past like my disordered eating, any of that stuff. My head is in a whole different place now. Right. So I go there and she brings it up and I start bawling. I go, you don't even know how much I've gone through this and how unfair it feels that you are putting me in this box. I used to have binge eating disorder. Well, I was never diagnosed with it, but I felt like I likely could have been at a time when I was in school. I went through all this. I am finally eating things that I like and in much smaller portions because it just feels better to me. Like I know how to eat now. And you're telling me that that's not okay. And I'm not okay with that. And so, I was really taken aback after that moment because I was like, whoa, I thought we were way over this, Amy. But, it comes up still. And I think that I want to normalize that for people, that it never truly goes away. And then, she sat there with me and she listened and she was nodding and she was like, I get it. And kind of commiserating with me on her own weight, which was a little strange. And then she's like, I'm going to show you this Instagram account. I think that you'll find it really motivating. And when she used the word motivating, I was like, oh no. And it was an Australian shake company that showed before and after pictures. And I was like, oh my gosh, you don't get it at all. at all. And I think of all the people that I see at the hospital on a regular basis that get judged by their weight because of their deep, now chronic diseases that are oftentimes based on obesity. But I have to think how much of it is because A, they don't want medical care, which is their autonomy to not want that instead of being labeled as non-compliant. People deserve to live their life the way that they want to. And B, how easily could it have been caught or managed better if they weren't terrified to go to the doctor because the doctor focused on things that they didn't want to focus on, or that they couldn't afford it because of their insurance because they used to be in a higher body weight, so they weren't used to going to the doctor anymore. Even for my clients now, it's so difficult. They like, I just want to see a provider that's going to be safe for me. Like, they don't have to be super safe. They just need to be like, I trust that you're working with a dietitian. I don't have to bring any of this up. And I don't find any. I want so badly for there to be providers where I can say, yeah, they're good. They're going to treat you with respect. They're going to ask you the right questions, and they're going to help you work on your health the way that you want to. Because ultimately, that's what I think healthcare should be. I think that people should be given more of the autonomy of where their life is going to go. And physicians shouldn't necessarily be the deciders in what's okay and what's not, but to provide options and provide informed decision to say, okay, this is what this is, without a side of judgment, which I think is the part that we see the most.
Oh my goodness. There is so much to unpack there. There is so much. This is a real life example. And you even mentioned that you were in a better place when you were able to speak up. How many times do you not speak up because you're not in that better place?
Right.
And you don't, I would think that you just don't go to the doctor. You even mentioned you weren't trying to get into that doctor's office unless it was vital because you had that ear infection. So how many people are not getting mammograms or not getting preventative health care that can save their lives? And like you had mentioned, like maybe some of the issues that people have could have been prevented if they felt safe.
Yeah.
And too many in healthcare are, I mean, that's just crazy to think you don't feel safe and comfortable talking to someone that is supposed to be caring for your health.
Absolutely. And all while increasing our stress levels about it all, which is, we know, is a factor towards our health.
Yeah.
So, it seems like such a round robin that is just not serving us as humans.
No, I think our goal really needs to influence healthcare in a positive way to find the doctor that you used to have. There has to be more of them. It's a needle in a haystack right now, but we have to find more, maybe doctors just coming into the field. I mean, listeners, if you have doctors that
Share them.
yeah, share them.
Yell their names on the mountaintops. We need them.
Yeah, we need to know who these doctors are and hopefully influence change in the doctors that are, practicing these unsafe things, the literally harmful practices.
Absolutely.
Before we close out, I wanted to just ask you, what is it like being an RD? I know that most are the typical RD is a thin white woman. So, what is your experience being an RD in a fat body?
Yeah, I was the one of the only ones in my class, I assure you of that, as I was going through school. Certainly, probably the only one in the larger size body that I was in. I consider myself in the super fat category of, based on the different, I don't know who created it, but the different fat levels, I suppose. So certainly not very many at all. And still, I feel like puts me at a bit of a advantage because there are people who are looking for people who look like them to be providing more of that care. And certainly that goes to finding more Black and Indigenous and Latina well, I won't say Latino. We're a female led unfortunately or fortunately field, but finding those who are of different identities or even queer identities that can relate to people more so that they feel comfortable having these conversations and knowing that their provider has experienced it in some way. And not that everyone's experience is the same, but I find that when I speak with so many of my clients, I go, yeah, I get it. Like, I get that. I get feeling that way. And I think sometimes people just need to hear that they're not alone in feeling this way. And it's okay. It's not okay that it's happening, but it's okay to have the feelings around it that you are. And sitting in that, I think Brianna Campos of Body Image with Brie kind of coined this term of sitting in the suck of sometimes it just sucks. And until we have good change, it's going to be that way. So we unfortunately have to figure out our ways to cope with it. And I'm grateful to be one of those people who can help people through that, because I know I needed one and I wish I had that option.
Yeah, that representation is so important. And I value what you're doing. I know our listeners value it. And there's someone that's probably looking you up right now. I'm going to put your information in our show notes so that way they can connect with you virtually, since we are now living in a virtual world now.
Yes.
So I like to ask all of our guests some simple questions just to connect a little bit. So, what is your favorite way to move your body?
It's actually something that I am building back up right now. I think since being a mom, movement hasn't been on the top priority list for me. But I've always loved to dance. Having dance parties is one of my favorite things to do in life, especially in my kitchen. And I've also taken up axe throwing lately. I can't wait to join a league when leagues are in, because I have so much fun with that. I love throwing heavy stuff around from my lifting days. So it's a nice lateral move over until I can get back up to lifting.
Yeah, and I think it's a good stress reliever too. Rather than
Absolutely.
throw things at your kids, you
Yeah.
can throw the axe. Yeah.
Yes.
So, what is your favorite way to practice self-care?
My favorite way to practice self-care is reading. I still tend to not make enough time for that, but I find now that I'm a little bit older, I actually have the attention span for it, which I don't think I had when I was younger. And I love to continue to learn. It's one of my favorite things to do. And so I'm a bit of a nonfiction junkie, especially in the anti-diet haze world. And we have so many amazing books coming out in our field. So I'm lucky and excited to keep on reading them.
Yeah, and we have made a page on our website for a reading list for those that would
Awesome.
like to add to that list a book that you absolutely love. And like you said, there's a lot coming out. There's a lot that just are staples
Mhm.
for us to read on intuitive eating, on joyful movement, health at every size. So, reading is definitely a great way to practice self care. And Audible works too. You could always go on Audible if
That's
you want
fair.
to. Yeah. 2020 created an opportunity for us all to binge watch or maybe binge listen or binge read. We had all this time that we were locked in our homes or away from being at work. We were on lockdown. So is there anything binge worthy you recall from this past year that you'd like to share?
So it just came out this year, but WandaVision. We are huge comic book fans in our home, and my daughter's actually named after an X-Men character. So we're really in it. So when it comes to any kind of good quality comic book stuff out there, we're into it. And WandaVision surely did not disappoint. It was wonderful. We were
Good
sitting at the edge of our seats every Friday waiting for it.
Good to know. That'll go on my list. I'm pretty sure my husband watched it while I was watching Housewives or something stupid
Great.
like that. So I'll make sure to go back and watch that. And then what's your favorite music? It could be a song, an artist, just a genre of music, because I know that you like to have your dance parties in your kitchen. Is there something that's getting you dancing right now?
I've recently found the blah blah blahs, and they're kind of like a mod retro poppy kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, but amazing. That's really getting me going. I really love them, and their lead singer Ashley Levy is really awesome. And so I just really digging them lately. I love any kind of chick rock I'm a Joan Jett fan through and through, and any of that I'm really into.
I love all the suggestions that I get. We at Pop Studio are a music-driven studio, so we like to use music for our dance and our bar and our bounce and our boxing classes. And people often ask me, where do you get all these great music ideas? And it comes partly from this podcast, because people like you share something that the blah, blah, blahs, I don't think I've ever heard of them. And now they are going on my playlist. So thank you for
Very
that
good.
suggestion. And
Yeah.
thank you so much for spending the time with me today and sharing with listeners your story and your journey and the work that you're doing. I so appreciate you taking the time today and sharing.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
So I'll be sharing all of Amy's information in our show notes, and we'll be following and we'll be helping to destroy diet culture.
Love it. Let's do it.
So that was my interview with Amy. I hope that you are inspired, that you are moved to create some change, and that you would like to see some change in the world and healthcare and in the healthcare that's provided to all of us as humans. I really enjoyed speaking with Amy, and I hope that you will continue to follow her and reach out to her if you have any questions. We need more people like Amy in this world doing this work and reaching more people. So if you like this episode, be sure to rate it, review it, share it with people that you know. Follow us so you don't miss a single episode. We release a new episode every week. And as always on our blog, I will include all of the show notes, all of the links and ways to connect with the podcast, as well as our guests, including Amy today on the podcast. So we look forward to bringing you more guests each and every week on the Breaking Body Biases, and we'll see you next time.